Can you believe it? Part 8 already? Part 8? We're not done yet. But this week we are talking about Big Pharma. We're pulling the curtain back on this, so I hope you're ready. Okay, so I have a total of 5 clips to show us, 4 being from one specific interview podcast, the PBD podcast. They were talking to Dr. John Abramson, and he was kind of exposing this whole idea of Big Pharma. And this first clip, I think, is really crucial to lay the framework or foundation for what exactly we're going to peel back as far as Big Pharma goes. Now, I will link the whole interview up in the corner because I think it's really worth the watch. But this first clip, they kind of talk about this whole idea that book review versus peer review and how the experts don't really have access to the data because the drug companies own them. And they explain it in a way that the average everyday person can hopefully understand. And I think this is a good place to start. So check this out, and then we'll dive into this together.
Can I ask you a question? As I was reading that part, I read a summary of your book and what you were saying here, and I was trying to convert it into an understanding for the common man. I'd like to know if you think my understanding is correct. Yeah. So Pat writes a book, a deep research book. I am the first person, so I see the whole book, all of his research, all of his appendices, and I write a book review. You write what's called a peer review. Most people think, well, another learned doctor must have gone through everything and is writing a peer review. But in fact, you wrote your peer review only on my book report. You never read Pat's book. Is that a good understanding of what you're describing for the common person?
It is, but it's worse. Let's translate the Pat's book and the review into clinical practice guidelines, which doctors have to follow. They get presented in court if things go awry. The people who write those clinical practice guidelines are relying on the studies that have been published in the journals. Those studies have been peer-reviewed, but the data hasn't been analyzed. When the guidelines are written, the experts who write those guidelines just have access to the articles that are published. They don't have access to the real data. So to go back to your analogy, you'd be writing, if I relied on a review, that wouldn't be good. But if I relied on Patrick's references, which is what the experts do who write the guidelines that tell doctors how to practice, that doesn't work either because that's not independently analyzed data.
God, this is crazy. So now I write the book review, 5 other doctors do a peer review of my book review, and then a 6th doctor has access to that and only that and starts writing the how-to procedure for emergency rooms and doctors to perform.
You've got it.
So let me go back to the question.
And none of those people go back to Pat's original book.
But Pat's original book isn't going to be good enough. They don't, but that's not good enough because what Pat has relied on, being a meticulous researcher, is the articles that have been published in the academic literature. In medicine, those articles, the peer review is a sham. So it's all built on sand.
So he may have written his book.
Wait a minute.
Researching
you said
weird information.
All the papers are all built on sham.
All the papers are peer reviewed. The peer reviewers don't have access to the data. The drug companies own the data.
Okay, so then let me go back to the question I was asking.
Now, I don't know if you caught that in that clip, but he mentions about how the experts, and I'm going to say experts in quotes, but how they rely more on references instead of the data. And just think about if you're going into anything and you're relying on only part of the puzzle or part of information that is biased because it's based on who did the research instead of the actual hard data, that's unbiased, and you're building guidelines and criterias of what emergency rooms and whatnot are supposed to follow. That's kind of crazy. That's kind of crazy. People thinking that it's, all been done, like the research has all been done, when really people that are putting out these guidelines have not actually seen or studied the data because they don't have access to the data. That's scary. Now the second clip, they kind of talk about the terms of the contracts and kind of explain this a little bit more. And I really think this is also crucial and beneficial for us to learn and kind of wrap our heads around. So let's look at this together and see if we can kind of understand it collectively.
Establishment candidates, right? But then there's the establishment side. You were part of the establishment for many years, right? And let me kind of ask the question, push back, tear my argument apart, whatever you want. That's the whole reason why we're having this conversation. One may say you were establishment. You practiced, you followed the guidelines, you followed the laws, you followed the rules, you followed all that stuff. Did you during COVID, Doc, at all have a moment where you're like, what the hell is going on here? Like, what are they forcing down people to take this with this much research, and we don't have the right kind of research, and look at the numbers that's coming up, and why are they not willing to release this? Why are they putting such a long time for us not to get the data on this? Why is it that we can't sue these guys? Why is it? Was there ever a moment during COVID for you where it's like a tipping point?
Yes, there was. But let me just go back and finish up our last conversation about peer review. There was a wonderful article. It was published in the New England Journal, actually, and it looked at the terms of the contracts between academic medical centers and the drug companies. So only about a quarter of the studies are done in academic medical centers. The rest are done in by for-profit research companies. But the ones that are done in the academic medical centers are going to be the highest quality studies. 50%, literally 50% of those contracts gave the drug companies the right to write up the results of the research, and the authors were suppressed to the point where they had the right to suggest revisions, but they couldn't make revisions. The drug company controlled the article. 50%.
Who allows that? You can't do that without the help of the government, though.
You don't need the government. What you need is a market that's not functioning, because the drug companies had pulled so much research out of the academic medical centers, and the academic medical centers needed that money. Managed care was coming in while this was happening. They didn't have a lot of money in their pocket.
Okay.
They needed to attract that research money as much as they could. They ended up with about 25% of the research. But it was the market, because the contract research organizations were willing to abide by those regulations. The academic medical centers had to. So it was a dysfunctional market that was allowing the drug companies to write up 50% of these articles, and the peer review was a sham. There was no way to get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, but isn't there a chairman of the board or a committee that's going to come in and say, what the hell are you guys doing? Because at this point, that means the doctors and the writers are slaves to these big pharmaceutical companies. And those are the ones that are making the big decisions for them, and they're telling them what to do. Is that kind of what it comes down to?
That's what it comes down to. So I was at a medical meeting, and I was sitting near an editor, not editor-in-chief, but a major editor of a major journal. And the meeting was over, and we got up to walk out. And I said to him, listen, why don't you guys demand the data from the trials that you're going to publish? It's pretty simple. The data's there. They could deliver it to you. It's a thing called a clinical study report. It's like 3,000 pages long. And they've already done it. They could deliver it. You could require it with the manuscript. And he said to me, before I took the next step, he said, requiring that data would be a death spiral for the journal. And what he's saying is, if we require data and other journals don't require the data, the companies won't submit their big articles to us. And a major part of the income of the journals, a major part of the income of the journals comes from selling reprints back to the company for their drug reps to hand out. And in 2005, 41% of the Lancet's income came from selling reprints. That's the last data there is. So he was admitting to me in sort of poetically economic language that they're in the business, the financial model that they're in is selling reprints back to the drug companies, and they can't behave in a way that's going to decrease their sales of those articles.
At what point?
Now, I don't know if you caught that in this clip, and if not, I want to highlight this. But he said 50% of these contracts gave the drug companies the right to write up the research and really suppressed the authors, and they could only suggest revisions, but they couldn't actually revise anything. 50%. We have to think about this. The authors, the ones who wrote the stuff, couldn't make revisions to their own research and findings because the drug companies were suppressing them. 50%? That's huge. That is huge. What is going on? All right, so this other clip that I want to show you, they kind of touch on the major sources of income for big pharma and the pharmaceutical companies. And I really think this is also beneficial for us to learn, to find out where this income is coming from. So let's look at this together.
Separate.
Basically, there are some journals that are different. The British Medical Journal, and it's now called the BMJ, is different. But they're not as commercially involved. But the biggest journals are playing in this financial arena where the editors have a fiduciary responsibility to maximize their profits. And they're doing it.
Yeah, but who's exposing them? Who is calling them out? Who is, like, for example, at least if I have a New York Times, I got a New York Post, right? If I got a WAPO, Washington Post, I got a Washington Times, right? And they're going to be opposing each other. In the business side, if I got a Forbes, I got a Fortune, I got an Entrepreneur, I got an Inc., I got a Business Week, I got different guys that maybe will be challenging each. I got CNN, I got Fox, I got MSNBC. There's competition, right? You mean to tell me there's nobody that's calling these guys out to their...
Patrick, that's why I'm sitting here. The mainstream media has put the lid on this. Nobody's covering it. Nobody is covering this. It's a tragedy, and we haven't even started to talk about the cost and the poor health of Americans that is largely tied into this. This is market failure. You know, Milton Friedman, the ultimate capitalist, said that there are three things a government should do. It should preserve law and order, it should enforce private contracts, and it should make sure markets work. He said that in 1962 in his book, Capitalism and Freedom. And if we would go back to those three principles and apply them to the pharmaceutical industry and what's going on in healthcare, we would take a giant step forward away from this.
So it sounds like you're saying that the business model is all wrong, because if I'm creating a medical journal, I'm not getting paid subscriptions from a bunch of doctors that want to read that. What you're saying is that if I publish articles that are in line with what the pharmaceuticals want, they say, hey, thanks for the nice article. Thanks for everything that goes with that. I'll take 10,000 copies of it, and then I'm going to go give them to my sales reps to hand them out to America's allergist if I'm making an allergy drug. You're saying that's the business model. It's not thousands and thousands of doctors paying subscription. Because if it was, Forbes would compete with Fortune, and business people would subscribe to one or the other based on which they think is better information. You're saying that they're really not operating publications. They're operating printing services that are reprinting articles for the medical establishment driven by the pharmaceutical company.
Correct. There is some subscription fees, but they're not the major thing. The major sources of income are selling reprints and selling advertising to the manufacturers.
But then to me...
So the major thing that I want to highlight or focus on from that clip is where their major source of income is. Selling reprints. Selling reprints. Shouldn't the major source of income be going after the truth and making sure that the patients, their health is the number one priority? But no, their major source of income and what they try to go after is selling reprints. So drug companies will not even really do the research. They just try to buy the research, biased research, and then promote it and sell as many copies as they can. And that's how they make money. They're not after the truth, which is really crazy, because when you are driven by making money instead of the truth and the well-being of other people, that's when you start losing your mind, start not thinking clearly. And this has been going on for a while. It's just crazy to think about. Now, this final clip that I want to show you from this PBD podcast interview, they talk about the costs of certain drugs, how much it's being sold for, and how much it actually costs to make. So look at this, and then I will highlight that and touch on that for a little bit. So check this out.
Non-health experts that were being silenced. It was anybody that disagreed with Fauci's position was being silenced.
Right.
Now it's 2024. Do you have anything to say about how the left mishandled COVID, led by Fauci's policies? Because Fauci is the one that was telling everybody what's the right thing for us to do and trust the science and wear 3 masks. We're taking pictures with masks. Then the pictures, cameras comes off. Everybody takes their mask off. People are not dummies sitting there saying, wait a minute, don't patronize me. Don't make me do something you don't want to do, but behind closed doors, you're doing it because it's a political party. That's where I saw in a regular world. I'm running an insurance company at our event. We have 10,000 people at our event. Half are Democrats, half are Republicans. But everybody was like, what the hell is going on here? These are valid concerns.
Yeah.
Your thoughts?
Absolutely. There is a bias on the left to support public health measures. It's a bias. There's also something going on with drug company money. And let me tell you a story that will make some news in the beyond. The story comes from the Boston Globe, but it hasn't gotten out, and it is very newsworthy, and it addresses exactly the question you ask. Claudine Gay just got fired as the president of Harvard University. She had plagiarized, which I think, I'm not an expert on this, but I think that meant missing quotation marks and not citing references. And that's not a good thing. An academic should not do that.
You sound like you're defending her, though.
Let me finish my story,
Okay.
and you won't be ready to pounce on me.
Okay.
I promise. She gets fired, and Alan Garber, who's been the provost of Harvard, gets appointed the temporary president. Okay? So that's what happened. Those are the facts. Alan Garber's salary as provost has been about $940,000 a year. I assume it's market value. I don't have a complaint. Since 2017, he's been on the board of 2 pharmaceutical companies. He's the provost of Harvard University, and he's been on the board of 2 pharmaceutical companies, and his annual salary from these 2 board positions is more than his salary from Harvard. It's $960,000.
Okay.
One of those 2 companies is Vertex Pharmaceuticals. They're selling their drug that is a revolutionary drug that decreases the pulmonary consequences of cystic fibrosis by about 14%, and they're selling this drug for $322,000. It costs them to make less than $6,000. So we've got the provost of Harvard University in a position of direct conflict of interest in talking about the public health consequences of this. Now, this hit me hard because I was teaching, I'm not on the faculty anymore, but I stepped down a year ago. But I was teaching healthcare policy at Harvard for many years. And one of the case studies we taught all the first-year students at Harvard Medical School was if Medicaid ran out of money, what the students in each seminar group, if Medicaid ran out of money, what services would you cut to have the least impact, to engage the students with this?
Great question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you cut out eyeglasses every other year? Do you cut out transportation to doctors? So forth. What they didn't talk about is that Vertex's drug costs $322,000 and costs $6,000 to make, and somebody ought to be negotiating with these guys to get a fair price.
Is that a dosage or an annual?
Annual.
So 360. If you got this terrible rare condition, it's $30 grand a month or 360 a year.
A little bit less, probably 28 or 27 a month.
Okay, but that was an annual figure,
Yeah,
and it cost
yeah.
$6 grand to make.
Yeah. Yes. And the hepatitis C drugs that cost $1,000 a pill, $84,000 for a course of treatment, and they're sold for $1,000 in India where it's generic. So what we've got is this enormously unfair.
So Vertex, I don't know if you remember those numbers, but Vertex, $322,000 annually, and it only costs $6,000 to make. $322,000 annually. That's what's being charged to the consumer. And it only costs $6,000 to make? Where's the rest of that money going? Where? Questions that need to be asked. Questions that really need to be dug into and researched. This is all for you guys to hopefully spawn your own research and dig deep into this so that you can kind of get to the bottom of what's going on. Now, this other clip is from Dr. Casey Means. She was on the Relatable podcast, which I will link that full interview up in the corner as well. But she was talking also about Big Pharma and this whole idea of chronic conditions and how they want to manage people instead of get them better and get them healthy, because they lose income on that. When you're chronic, you're a repeat customer. So check this clip out and let's hear what she has to say.
The system, when it comes to chronic health issues, has really done very little to earn our trust. As we've started medicalizing these chronic diseases, which are primarily based in diet and lifestyle, and many of which didn't even exist 75 years ago. At the same time, we've been asked to trust the science. These diseases have exploded in their rates and are going up every single year as we spend more money on them. So what I think the healthcare system has done, I mean, it has produced miracles, of course. Life expectancy has gone up in the last 100 years. But what our healthcare system has done well at is acute issues, things that are immediately going to kill you, like an infection or a trauma surgery or something like that you need to have. So acute issues. And that's primarily treating those, which are like the patient comes in, they get treated, they're gone. Those, I think the healthcare system does a miraculous job at. But what the healthcare system has done has asked to take our trust on its success in acute issues and apply it to chronic issues, issues that last for a long time, that need to be treated for life. If you think about an acute patient, that's not recurring revenue, but a chronically ill patient is recurring revenue for decades. And so essentially the system is asking us to not ask questions and to trust blindly because of the trust they engendered from acute issues, apply it to chronic, where they're abjectly failing at keeping us safe. They're not preventing these conditions. They're certainly not reversing these conditions. They're just managing them. And the message that I really want people to understand is that it's actually much less complex than we think to really improve our foundational metabolic health, to improve really the way our cells function and to really generate true health in our bodies. But we've got to focus on the right issue, which is helping to clean up the environment that our bodies and our cells are living in right now that are breaking them. And when we do that, and we really do truly heal the foundational pathways of our body related to metabolism and cellular health, we end up getting just incredible health across all these different systems. But unfortunately, right now, that's not what the system's going to help you with. Their revenue model is based on more patients going through the system as quickly as possible, which lends itself to going in, getting a prescription, and leaving.
So now with all of these clips that I've showed you, it really hopefully paints a good picture, or at least lays a good foundation that really sparks your interest to want to get to the bottom of Big Pharma and what exactly they push, the agenda that they push, and if they really do have your best interests in mind. So I just hope that this helps show us and pull this curtain back a little bit into the underbelly that is Big Pharma. And if they really truly are for the patient or the customer, or if they're for themselves, and how they can line their pockets. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope this helped. And thank you guys for watching this week, and please tune in next week for the next part in this video series.